Hello, beautiful, and welcome to Finding Fertility. I'm your host, Monica Cox from FindingFertility.co, and I created this podcast to help get you to start thinking outside of the box and realize that your infertility might have nothing to do with your lady bits. Rooted in functional medicine and personal experience, Finding Fertility is all about looking at the whole body and finding the root cause of your infertility. Finding Fertility does not diagnose, prescribe, or treat any issues of infertility, but what we do is take a holistic approach and improve your diet and your lifestyle to get you steps closer to creating your dream family. Just by being here with me, listening to this podcast, you're already going down the right path to making your dreams come true. Let's do this together. Happy Friday, y'all. Welcome back to another episode of Finding Fertility. I'm your host, Monica Cox, and I'm super excited to have Dr. Marc on. You might have seen his gorgeous face on YouTube. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I think there's a lot we could talk about, and you and I were on a panel recently, and I thought it was great to be with you on that panel. So I'm thrilled to be able to talk to you one-on-one.
Yeah, definitely. Well, just tell us a little bit of how you became a doctor within this fertility industry.
Yeah, you know what? It happened about 24 years ago, where I went to school and I wasn't quite sure. I knew I liked women's health, but I wasn't quite sure, what I wanted to do. And there's a lot of things that happen serendipitously in this world. And I started shadowing and working with a couple of other doctors while I was in school, and they all focused, I thought I was shadowing them because they were focusing on women's health, but it was within the scope of fertility and reproductive health. And so that's really kind of pushed me in this direction. And then I had two patients while I was in my last year of school at the school clinic that really kind of pushed me in this direction. And really, one was my brother. So he didn't come and see me in the school clinic. I worked with him virtually, him and his wife. But the other was a woman who had PCOS, and I helped her after about 4.5 months. She was pregnant, and my eyes just lit up when she came and told me, and I had chills. And she, I remembered talking her through it, and she left. She went home, and everyone was excited. We were all excited. She went home, and I just remember just sitting there for a moment saying that was amazing. I understand why people want to do this. I want to do this. I want to help more people do that, right?
Yeah.
Achieve that goal. And that's really what kind of pushed me down this road. That was really the final push that I needed. I helped her with her second, and I haven't spoken to her in, I don't know, 21 years or something like that, maybe 20 years. And I don't think she realizes how impactful she was in my life, because that really was the final push that pushed me in this direction. And, I don't know where I would have been without, and it's allowed me to help so many other couples in this world. So I'm always grateful for that experience and that opportunity that she gave me.
Yeah, that's awesome. What do you think is the biggest thing you've seen changed in the last 20 years then within this kind of, we look at it as fertility issues, right? But there is this infertility industry that
Yeah,
is booming.
yeah, there is. I think a lot's changed. I think from an industry perspective, the fertility world is really seen. It didn't used to be seen as an industry, and certainly is now, which tells me there's a lot of money being poured into it, a lot of money being spent on it. And as such, unfortunately, I think there's a lot of negative that comes with that. There's been a high prevalence of IVF clinics being sold. to venture capitalist firms. And as a result, like their bottom line is money and making money and selling the practice to make money. And so it changes the way that happens. It changes the way that business practices and how they support their patients. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality of it. I've seen a lot change in with technology. When I started, frozen embryo transfers were last resorts.
Yeah.
We just didn't. No one thought of them. No one did them. Everything was fresh. It was either day 3 or day 5. And then as the freezing process improved, it really changed how the fertility medicine and IVF protocols were used, and they changed dramatically. And then all the genetic testing has changed the way fertility clinics approach couples and how couples have to view, do we get genetic testing? Don't we get genetic testing? And it's kind of like assumed now that everybody does. I don't think that's so straightforward. And I have that conversation on a regular basis. So that's changed things. And now we're getting into ovarian rejuvenation and PRP and other, interesting things that a lot of it still needs a lot of research. A lot of it is still it's experimental, but it's got a lot of potential. And so there's just, it's changed quite a bit, and there's a lot of effort being put into it. And so in the beginning, when I said, there was a lot of money being put into it, there is, and a lot of it, I don't want it all to be seen as a negative thing. A lot of it's on the positive thing. There's a lot of research being put in, a lot of new products coming out, a lot of advancements, like I just mentioned, and that's all because of the money being poured in to see what sort of results we can get. I think some of the things that scare me in the future is, are we just going to make our babies in a dish in the future, and we're going to control every little aspect of what they become? And I think of this as, all the sci-fi movies that were sci-fi but are becoming reality. That sort of thing scares me. Like I'm nervous for what that could yield, and how easily that becomes acceptable in our current world. And so, I want everyone to have children and be parents. I just don't want it to be done the wrong way. And so that makes me a little bit nervous for what potentially might come down the road in the future.
Yeah. Have you seen that movie Pod?
Pod?
Yeah.
No.
I saw it on a flight once, and you're scrolling through, and it's literally a movie about the future and how it's frowned upon to get pregnant naturally. And you have your babies through these pods. They're like little eggs. And
Amazing.
this couple, like the husband is like a botanist, and so he's like like old school, like earthy and all that, right? But they live in this city. And yeah, it goes down this adventure for like, as someone who has the same views as you, of just like how scary it can actually get. You're sitting there just like cringing, and at the end, this couple, like, they go through with it, but then they like totally regret it.
Mm-hmm.
And they like basically steal their baby from this clinic and have to like birth it from this pod out in like the woods. It's crazy.
Weird.
But we're talking about these like crazy advances that we can't wrap our heads around, but you just go back 60 years and there's thinking the same thing of what we're doing
Yeah.
now. So
What we're doing now.
what does even 30 years look like from now? Because it just multiplies so much quicker, right? You get a
Yeah.
certain thing, and then that doubles the time or like lessens the time the next thing can come along. I think for me, my biggest thing, and I don't know if they'll ever be able to do this, but okay, the technology is great, but the man and the woman still have to produce certain quality egg and sperm. At the moment, there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing out there. When clients come to me like, I just want to target my egg quality, it's like, you can't. You got to target your whole body. It doesn't work that way. Same with
Right.
sperm. So my big thing to my community is like, I'm not against IVF. I have an IVF baby.
Mhm.
But what I'm against is the knowledge that's not being put out there, that you still have to take responsibility for your cellular health before you extract the egg and the sperm. And not that there's studies, because I don't think anyone out there is technically studying it. It's just observation that the IVF babies are 30% more likely to have all these chronic issues. And I don't think it's the treatment. I don't even think it's the drugs, which really have never been studied, especially autoimmune drugs. That's a big thing for me because I used autoimmune drugs as well. Um, it's it's the fact that the mother and the father are not healthy. They don't have that consciousness. Um, they get pushed through and then they continue to live the same lifestyle. And I mean, I know you don't know, pregnancy is so demanding, but I know that you
Yeah.
have as much knowledge as you possibly can as a man. But I'm like, that baby's going to suck the life out of you. So if you
Yeah.
barely have life going on,
Hmm.
you're putting yourself and your baby at like really high risks for, long-term future health.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point to mention. I'm not opposed to IVF with like everything I just said about technology. I'm all for it. My job is to support couples, meet them where they're at, and help them
Hmm.
achieve families. So I have nothing against it. I want everyone to really be well educated and understand the decisions that they're making. And I think that's lacking. 50% of the couples we support are going through either IUI or IVF.
Hmm.
So I understand what goes into it. I understand how demanding pregnancy can be. I understand how demanding parenthood is,
Yeah.
right? And so, you know, I think it's essential that we don't um, just assume because we're going to do IVF that I don't have to do anything different in my life. That we're just going to walk in and get pregnant with IVF and go on our merry way. I agree. I think we all need to take responsibility for ourselves. I think we run into a lot of problems when we forego our responsibility as humans and as parents or potential parents and just say, well, I could just live I could keep doing everything I normally do. It doesn't make a difference. I'm just going to get pregnant and then, we go on from here. The reality is then you are compromising your genetic lineage
Hmm.
by doing that because y your genes, how your health right now, how you are when you conceive a child, your health when you are carrying a child is going to impact the health of that child moving forward. And by the way, the children that they produce, right?
Yeah.
And so we want to be as healthy as possible when we're putting ourselves in that situation to create healthy families, healthy children's moving forward. And I think that's really, really important. And I agree, a lot of people just don't do that. And
Yeah.
that's a huge problem. I think it's interesting. I think it'd be interesting to look at a study. I don't know who's going to do it, but to look at a study of IVF couples who were successful and those one to see like if you were healthier were you more successful, and then two, of the ones who had children, the ones who were proactive and took care of themselves and were healthier versus the ones who didn't, and what do those children's health wise look like, because you had mentioned that 30% number of IVF children having health issues, and it's a high number. um, I don't put all of it just on our individual health. I do think that the medication and the protocols that we're going through are definitely going to contribute to that. Um, but I'd be curious to see, what
Yeah.
does that look like? What's that difference? I don't think anyone's going to do it because
No,
it would compromise too much of like the IVF industry if
exactly.
we did that. So it's never going to happen, but I think it'd be interesting to look at.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I say it's an observation. And I do agree, there's always a contribute factor. When I started using immune suppressing drugs, I was well on my way into my health journey. And so I was very proactive of like, okay, I'm going to use these drugs, but I know my diet. I'm using bone broth. I'm eating liver. I have a good detox. All the steps. to help negate the risks, because that's obviously the number one thing I'm getting from people. What immune suppressing drugs did you use? And I'm like, I'm not gonna tell you exactly what I use, because that's not like how it works. Like like
Right.
first, I'm not a doctor, and second, a doctor would have to prescribe that for you, and you need data for that prescription. But secondly, it worked once. I got pregnant 3 times with immune suppressing drugs, but I only had 1 live birth. And it almost seems like people just look at that 1 live birth. And I'm like, "Yep, but guys, it didn't work all the time."
Right.
And I have my theories of as to why. And then people still, because I got pregnant naturally after my second miscarriage, so our last frozen embryo transfer with immune suppressing drugs, and they're like, "Well, the drugs are in your system." I was like, drugs don't work that way. Like,
Not for that long. Yeah,
they
no, no.
they leave your system. Um, so it's a very interesting conversation to have with people. But that is my biggest thing. And I don't even think, what I say to my clients now too is like, if you can choose to look at your situation that you're lucky, that you're actually figuring out how to improve your cellular health. There's a lot of people that don't have fertility issues. You don't have to be perfect to get pregnant. The crackhead on the
Right.
side of the street has proven that to us. But what risks of issues? And I know you have children. I have 2 small young boys. In my eldest class, he's in 2nd grade, moving on to 3rd grade. More than half the kids in there have not special needs that would be classed as special needs, but very big mental, emotional, and a little bit of learning needs. 50%. It's
That's high.
crazy. It's
That's a high
crazy.
number. Yeah.
And we see it in their soccer team. We see it like everywhere. It's just such a large proportion. And, there's only still a smaller proportion of us who necessarily used IVF or had fertility issues. So it compromises everyone. Everyone needs to take stock in this. I had Dr. Ben Lynch on the podcast ages ago, and he said, one of his friends said, more people spend years planning their wedding than they will plan to have a child and
Oh,
optimize
yeah.
their health. And
It's
it's
crazy,
true.
right? It's great.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful way to think about it. I like Dr. Lynch. But that's a wonderful thought because I say the same thing. It's like, we should be planning and preparing when when we get married, we should start, or even before, we should start being proactive about prenatal care and being ready to get pregnant when the time comes. And that's exactly what ends up happening is they spend more time, a year more working on their wedding than they ever do thinking about getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just is a societal thing, right? Like, that most people aren't born with fertility issues. It's decades of not knowing how to take care of their body. They might not have any warning signs, and all of a sudden they can't get pregnant. That was us, right? Very unexplained infertility, very silent autoimmune issue. I was not a classic case. But in your practice, and this is what I get is there's so much education out there now. It's almost overwhelming, and them not knowing exactly what to do. But they're using their intuition, and they're like, that feels right. It feels good that I can do something about improving my chances. And then they start talking to us, but they're very much stuck in that mindset of like, well, my doctor said, or my test results said, or my 10 rounds of IVF didn't work. So why will it ever work if IVF didn't work? What's your take on that with the whole white coat syndrome, and how can people really step into their empowerment and shift that for them? Because I think that's the game changer.
Yeah, I think we need to trust ourselves and trust our intuition much more than we do. We ignore it, we push it down. We don't pay attention to it in the same way we should. And look, there's a reason why there's something called woman's intuition or female intuition. It wasn't just created by accident. That statement didn't come out of nowhere. There's a reason why. It's because if we listen to our gut, what does our gut say? we will know the right answer, the right path, but we're scared of listening to ourselves because maybe it didn't work out before, or maybe you've been taught like, well, if I listen to my gut, that means I'm going against what the doctor said. But I've been told, we got to listen to the doctor. And so I've got to do what they say. I actually just had this conversation this morning. There was a woman in my program who had gone through, she started stimulation for her potential retrieval because the doctor said she should. And, when I looked at it, I said, I wouldn't have gone into a cycle, this cycle. Like, your numbers didn't look right. Everything didn't look right. And she goes, yeah, I thought about that, but I didn't want to say anything to the doctor. I was like, it's okay. They're not gods. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay to let them know that this doesn't sit right. Like, let's try next cycle. So I think we need to verbalize our feelings a little bit more. We need to trust what we're feeling and not suppress it. We need to listen to ourselves. And I think we often make decisions emotionally. Like, you're in this moment, this doctor said this, oh, I feel rushed, and oh, okay, I'll do it. And versus saying, well, can I have a couple of hours, or can I
Mm-hmm.
have an hour to think about this? Can I make a phone call? Can I let you know in a couple of hours, whatever it might be? And then you take some time and you think about it, and you maybe do a little meditation to think about what feels right. You talk to your partner. If you're working with a coach like you and me, maybe you reach out to them to get their opinion. And then you can make an informed, calm decision that works best for you. And I think often that's really one of the bigger concerns, where we're not trusting ourselves. We don't want to disappoint the doctor. Well, if I say no to the doctor now, is he going to work with me in the future?
Mm-hmm.
They want to work with you in the future. Don't worry about it.
We'll take your money.
They'll take your money. And we've been ingrained to not question the person with the white coat and the doctor, regardless of the health condition. By the way, like, I say this to my family all the time. Well, did you ask your doctor why? No. Well, why not? Well, he said. I'm like, that doesn't make him right. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
all make mistakes. We're all human, first and foremost, which means we could miss something, we could forget something, we could oversee something, we could be having a bad day, right? Like, so it's okay to question them. They might not like it, doesn't mean you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have to have more confidence in ourselves, listen to our bodies, and really not feel pressured or rushed to make these decisions. And it's okay to say no.
Yeah. I think too, the whole time aspect,
Yeah,
the society, what we've been taught over the last multiple decades, and even the doctors. I mean, I do think I'm going to say they're the worst at it, because that's who is telling my clients these
they're
things.
pressuring them. Yeah.
They're pressuring, and they feel time poor. And, I always say to my clients, I'm very honest. We're having different conversations from 22 to 32 to 42.
Yep.
We're having a very different conversation 46, 47, 48.
Yeah.
There are time restraints, but time is also your friend if you use it wisely. And that's the big thing. The hardest thing for a woman who consistently sees her body, quote unquote, failing her, whether it's naturally or through medical assistance, to wrap her head around, no, time is on my side. I'm doing things differently now. I will see
It,
different results.
it's 100% true. Like, you call it time poor, which I like. I've never heard it, and I like that. I just call it the time factor, where we need to account for time in different ways at different stages of our life. And
Mhm.
that's what pressures us to make potentially certain decisions that we wouldn't have made if we were 32 versus 42, right?
Yeah.
And so that piece is really difficult. But I 100% agree. I think we can use time on our side to our advantage, regardless of the age. You just might have less time to use to your advantage at
Mhm.
any one of those given age time frames. but we can, if we just do the same thing that we've been doing and we don't change what we're doing, then time's not on our side. Then we're not using it proactively. But if you're going to be proactive, make changes, utilize it to become healthier, then I've had many people say, I'm a year or two older and I have better quality eggs today and responded better to my IVF cycle than I did X amount of years ago. I see that and hear it all the time. It's because we utilize that properly, so I think we can, but we have to trust, like you have to be okay moving forward with it. And I think the hardest thing with time as we get older is this fortitude to keep going. It's hard to keep going. Like if you've been doing it for a while and you've had negative results, or it's just a lot of effort, it's draining.
And we are going to end today's episode right there. I hope you're enjoying this episode. Please come back next week for the second half of Marc's amazing discussion. Until then, have a beautiful weekend.
Thank you once again for tuning in to the Finding Fertility podcast. If you're loving this podcast, please leave us a rating and review and let us know how this podcast is supporting you to get steps closer to creating your dream family. I hope you have a beautiful weekend, and we will see you next Friday for another episode of the Finding Fertility podcast.